Welcome, everybody, to another installment of Open World Chat. I'm John Odom, and I'm here with my co-host Leanne Allen, and we have the pleasure of talking to author, pundit, Emmy-winning producer, all-around Renaissance guy, Steve Benen. Steve, thanks for being here.
John, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Full disclosure, I do know Steve. He is a fellow Vermonter, and we met back in one of the blogger barbecues, right?
I think that's right. Yeah, Bill Simon introduced us at one of the. That's right.
Yeah, and you were surfing the blogger wave there at the time, or the first blogger wave, I guess, to start establishing your name.
That's right. It was right. It was. I started in 2003 when the blogosphere was just kind of coming into its own, and it was a perfect time. You know, it was a moment, and we kind of just captured this moment in time in the early Bush era. And a lot of us went on to do bigger and better things, and it worked out really well for me.
What was the thing that got you into blogging? I mean, it wasn't something that everybody did, right?
That's true. I am one of those guys who, well, first of all, I'm a political junkie for life. Got my degrees in political science. I'm just one of these guys who's always consumed a lot of newspapers and has always had a lot of political opinions. And I was one of these guys who used to kind of pace around my kitchen, ranting and raving about politics all the time. And my wife got tired of hearing me. And she said, why don't you just start a blog? Just take all this commentary and analysis that you shouted in the kitchen all the time. Just write it all down, publish it, and see if anybody cares. And that'll be nice. And then I think she was thinking that meant I would just stop bothering her, which is largely true. I think that it's become a useful outlet. But it didn't occur to me at the time that this would become something I could do professionally. It didn't occur to me at the time that it would become my job, and that I would be able to get paid to do it. This was just something that I was going to do for a little while until I could find a real job, and it became my job, and so it worked out pretty nicely for me.
Man, you're living the dream. That's so cool.
I am living the dream. I say that all the time to friends and family. I say I am living the dream because when you think about it, I mean, who gets to do what I do? Who gets to get up every morning and publish online commentary all day, work for the Rachel Maddow Show, write books? Like I am absolutely living the dream. I am glad that you put it that way because I feel exactly that way.
So you had a book come out last year, and apparently caused a pandemic.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. I have to apologize to the world. My book caused the pandemic. No, yes, I wrote the book in late 2019. It came out last summer. It's called Impostors: How Republicans Quit Governing and Seized American Politics. And I was glad to see that it found an audience. It made some bestseller lists, and I got a lot of positive feedback. And now the paperback came out just this week on June 22nd. And I hope that folks will check it out. It's a new and improved version of the book. I was able to update it and add a lot of new content related to things that happened in 2020. And so, yes, I'm very excited about it.
Yeah. All right. So Maddow, talk to us about Maddow. How did you land that gig, and what is it like working on the show?
That is a good question. In my original blog, my independent blog that I started in 2003, by sheer luck, one day, Rachel Maddow found one of my posts by way of Google. She was Googling something like we all do, and she saw the post that she was looking for, and she read it and she liked it. And then in time, she became a regular reader. She started thinking, I like this post. I'm going to see if there are more posts like this. And that worked out. And in time, this was, say, 2005, 2006. This is when Air America Radio launched. I don't know if folks remember the Air America Radio experience, but it was this national progressive radio network. And Rachel had a show on Air America. And so she used to start booking me as a guest on her radio program. And I would appear, she and I would chat beforehand and then be on the air, and then we'd chat afterwards. And, we just kind of struck up a friendship by way of these interviews. In time, she then was able to move on from Air America to MSNBC. And in 2008, her very first program, I was her very first guest on her very first show. And,
wow.
And sometimes, in fact, I was on the show, I was on as a guest this week, and she was kind of reflecting on the fact that I was the first guest on the first show. And I reminded her that the problem with that is that when we go back to look at that video, she looks the same and I don't, which I find terribly unfair. But nevertheless, she maintains her youthful good looks and I do not. But that's okay.
Yeah, I hate people like that. Oh man.
And so that was 2008, and then in 2012. So in the early years of the show, I was a guest with some regularity, and then in 2012, she and her team decided that it'd be good if I joined them, and I was, of course, only too glad to do so. And I've been with the team ever since. In January, it'll be 10 years.
Wow.
And so, Leanne, you asked what that's like, and I will tell you that it is a dream come true. We've all heard the expression "never meet your heroes," and I get the idea behind that expression because when we meet these people that we put on pedestals, when we meet them, we discover that they have the same flaws and insecurities and problems that the rest of us do, and then we said they're somehow diminished. But I am here to tell you that expression is not true, because Rachel Maddow is my hero, and meeting her is one of the best things that's ever happened to me. I love her dearly. I consider her family, and I learn from her every day. And so to those who think that to those who are afraid to meet their heroes, rest assured, it is a false maxim. It is not true at all.
It depends on the hero.
Well, I guess it depends on the hero. That's true.
So one thing that I've always been curious about, and obviously you're happy, as we say, you're living the dream. But when you were offered the job, did you have any hesitation? Because you were designated as one of the most influential pundits in the country, and that was sort of under your own banner. And to then decide, I'm going to shift that banner under somebody else's banner. I mean, did you have any conflict about that?
That is a fantastic question. I was kind of my own entity. I had my own, I guess, I hate to use the word brand because it just sounds so very corporate, but I think you're right. I was on my own in terms of my public footprint, for lack of a better phrase. But I was only too glad to join the Rachel Maddow Show, not only because I wanted to work with Rachel and be a part of her team, but the truth of the matter is the expansion of my reach. My work reaches more people by appearing on MSNBC than it did when I was on my own or when I was working at the Washington Monthly, where I was a blogger for 4 years. I'm able to reach a broader audience. I'm able to have more people read what I write, and that has always been a big thing. I think that musicians want to be heard, and comedians want to be able to have an audience in a comedy club or on HBO or Netflix, and bloggers want to be read. They want people to read their stuff. And so MSNBC offered me this opportunity to reach more people, have them read my stuff. And so I did not, the hesitation, if I had any hesitation at all, it did not last more than 30 seconds. It was a dream opportunity, despite the fact that I am part of a larger enterprise. I'm part of Team Maddow. I am proud to do it, and I have not looked back.
With the pandemic, I seem to have noticed that people who were bloggers prior to the pandemic adjusted better to having to work from home and having to be, kind of hiding in their hovel and doing their work instead of out in the office with other people. Did you find that too?
I had a strange reaction because my lifestyle did not change at all. I mean, literally, it did not change in any tangible, meaningful way. Because I work from home. I was working from home. In fact, I've been doing maintaining the same routine for nearly 20 years, where I get up, I consume the news, I write about it, and I do that all day, and then have dinner and go to bed and start anew. I was doing this same thing before the pandemic that I was during it and after. It is all kind of the same. And so I have friends and family and neighbors who've struggled to adapt to the changing circumstances in 2020, and even as things kind of continue into 2021. And I sympathize, and my heart breaks for those who've lost loved ones and who've struggled with the virus themselves. But I haven't been able to personally relate to the changes that some people have struggled with because I didn't have any changes in my own personal lifestyle. My own day-to-day tasks were identical. And so I think blogging prepared me for this shift because I just started, because I was already at home. I was already sequestered into my home office. And so I had an unusual set of circumstances that allowed me to adapt by virtue of not having to adapt.
So I got a question about the past compared to the present and our whole new political world we're in.
Yes.
Okay, I was looking at a very old Carpetbagger Report post you did, and there was a line that I couldn't help but compare to now, even though, well, in the sense that there's no comparison. I'm going to read it real quick. Political junkies and readers of Dick Morris will remember that Bill Clinton, in the wake of the disastrous 1994 congressional elections, took Morris's advice and began campaigning against both parties in Congress, holding himself out as a better, more pragmatic alternative. The strategy called triangulation drove the left crazy, but it worked. So we had a recent small-handed president who has famously run against both parties. But I wouldn't call that triangulation, and I suspect you wouldn't. I think there's a lot more angles than three. What was the difference between running against both parties back then and running against both parties as Trump has done it?
Yeah, I think that the difference is, well, there are a handful of things that come to mind. I mean, Bill Clinton was a partisan his whole life. He was always identified with Democratic politics. He ran as a Democrat in Arkansas, et cetera, et cetera. Trump's identity has always been tied to his own corporate brand. He was never really a Republican. He ran for president in 2000 on the Reform Party ticket. He never really raised money for the party or its candidates. He was never really involved in lobbying on behalf of various ideas in terms of the party platform. His identity was completely unique from GOP politics at every level his entire life, whereas Bill Clinton was always tied to Democratic politics. And I think also that Bill Clinton was looking for a way to survive politically and recognizing that neither party was particularly popular. And so if he kind of triangulated against them, it would advance his own interests. Whereas Donald Trump just never really cared about policy or governing or party politics at all in any level. I mean, it was just I think that it's fair to say that he saw the Republican Party, Republican nomination process as just a means to an end. That for him, it was simply a matter of, I can use the party as a vehicle to advance my own brand, advance my own ambitions, advance my own ability to raise my profile, possibly for another television show, et cetera, et cetera. But it wasn't triangulation for the purpose of political survival. It just kind of came naturally to him because he didn't care. There was no real interest in the party. He didn't care about its agenda. Didn't care about its platform. He didn't care whether he agreed with party orthodoxy. It just didn't matter. It ties in nicely, I think, to my book, which is about how Republicans are a post-policy party indifferent towards governing. Well, Donald Trump embodies that philosophy. He does not care about the substance of anything. He never took an interest in policymaking or governing or the ideas of solving problems. And so I think that is the qualitative difference between Clinton-esque triangulation and Trump's just wholesale indifference towards Democrats and Republicans in general, because they're interested in policy. They have policy agendas. They have platforms, and he does not.
I'll just follow up to that real quick. I'm glad you mentioned the term post-policy that you use. I'm sort of fascinated by these terms and ideas that meant something only a few years ago and now either mean nothing or mean something totally different. The idea that it's just about getting elected again, right? That policy doesn't matter. It's about keeping and getting power. That was always something that centrists were accused of in both parties. Wouldn't exactly say post-policy, I guess, but non-policy, but still the same idea. They were accused of just being about their own power and their own reelection. It's a different world now. That means something completely different.
I think that the criticism that centrists have traditionally had, at least over the last, say, generation or so, has been that it's not that I don't disagree with you entirely. I think that I'd be more specific, though, about centrists being more of a split the difference kind of approach. That for a lot of centrists, they care about policy outcomes insofar as they want there to be policy outcomes, but they were concerned about it being appearing too far to the left or being too far to the right. And so their general approach would be, let's just try and find some kind of middle ground and pass that legislation in order to just kind of cling to some ideal of moderation. I think that with my book, it's a different approach with post policy. And the point I was trying to emphasize in the book is that Republicans used to have some interest in government and policy making and the substance of solving problems. And we look at, for example, at 1986 when Reagan and Republicans did tax reform as an example. They spent months and held countless hours of congressional hearings, and there was scrutiny of various ideas, and they approached it the way one would expect policymakers to approach any serious dispute. Now, that was in 1986. It took the better part of a year to pass that tax reform package. Now we can contrast that in 2017 when Republicans in the Trump White House took up tax reform. They huddled in private for a week or so, came together with a bunch of tax breaks, unveiled it, passed it, no hearings, no scrutiny. There was no buy-in from economists or tax policy experts. They just rushed it through and passed it because, frankly, they just didn't care. It was tax breaks for the wealthy. It was tax breaks for big corporations. And they called it tax reform and moved it right through. We can contrast those two as an example of one instance in which Republicans took policymaking seriously, and another instance in which they did not. And that transition between 86 and 2017, I think, reflects this larger shift within the party. It is a party that no longer cares about governing, no longer cares about the details and data and expertise and analysis. That is, to me, one of the defining problems in American politics today is that Republicans simply don't care. They are indifferent to the substance, whereas they didn't used to be. I would disagree with a lot of that happened in the Reagan era, for example, or the Nixon era, or the Eisenhower era, and so on and so on. But I recognize the fact that at the time, those Republicans cared about solving problems. They identified problems and went about taking on a serious approach to trying to solve those problems. It is a fundamentally different picture now. There has been this radical transformation into this belief that policymaking doesn't matter. Politics matters, ideology matters, trying to acquire and maintain power matters, but governing does not.
Yeah, I was just about to say what it sounds like is they shifted from caring about the outcome for the nation to caring about the outcome for themselves.
Sure. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if on any given issue, I think one of the first questions, if not the only question that GOP leaders ask is, will this help me gain power? Will this help me keep power? Will this help me win the next election cycle? Not, will this help make a material difference in the lives of American families? That's not the principal focus. And so, yeah, I think that you put that well. I think that's an accurate description of the circumstances.
So in terms of triangulation doesn't exist anymore in the same sense. It's completely polarized.
I think that's right. I think that the idea, even with Trump, who would be critical of Republicans on occasion, he wasn't criticizing them because he thought that they were somehow wrong in the substance of issues. He'd only criticize them if they got in his way, if they dared to defy his will, if they dared to criticize something that he wanted to do or to benefit his own pocket. But it was not a question of him trying to triangulate a way into saying that Republicans are wrong and he is above them. He's only above them insofar as he wants them to follow his lead on his own corrupt goals. So, yeah, I don't see triangulation as 90s era triangulation. I think is a thing of the past and is unlikely to return anytime soon.
Though it's interesting to note that if you look at the Democratic side, you see that there are still people who have that mindset, right? So they think that we need to, reach out to the other side, that we need to, try harder to come up with things that make Republicans happy, but the Republicans aren't playing that game anymore.
Yeah, I think that is exactly right. I think that a lot of Democrats in Congress make the same mistake that a lot of voters make. For the longest time, voters, the American mainstream, saw the two main political parties as more or less mirror images of one another. That despite their ideological differences, they were both mature, functioning, policy-making entities that could be trusted with levers of power, that they had technocratic wherewithal to solve problems. And I think that voters would vote their preferences, but in the back of their minds, they could take comfort knowing, well, no matter who wins, it's not like they're going to just stop governing. It's not like they're just going to stop making policy. There'll be different policies that they pursue, but fundamentally they can be trusted with the levers of power. And I think that assumption is in need of a reexamination and in need of a reevaluation, which is why I wrote this book, is that assumption is no longer true. That if people who look to Republicans as a mature, responsible policymaking entity, that looking at to the party that way, they're making a mistake. And to your point, I think that's exactly what we're seeing in Congress. Joe Manchin, for example, a senator from West Virginia, I think looks at Republicans and says, well, they're a functioning governing party. And if we just reach out to them and sit down at the negotiating table in good faith and try and work out our differences, then things will work out and we'll have policymaking on a bipartisan basis. Won't that be delightful? And I think that he's making a mistake because I think that he is failing to recognize this radical transformation that we've seen in GOP politics, to my argument, over the last 12 years.
So they're doing the political version of that self-help book that Oprah pushed, The Secret, right? Where you're supposed to act as though the things you want to manifest are happening, and like leaving the dishes undone because a maid will show up. That's they're sort of going through the motions of acting the way things were and just hoping that a lot of folk just hoping that they'll come back.
Right. Acting the way things were, I think, is exactly the right way of putting it. I think, John, that you've really touched on something there, because if we just kind of work from the assumption that Republicans are the way they were in our parents' generation or our grandparents' generation, then things will work out, because if we just pretend they are out how they were, then things will be fine. We wouldn't have to worry about our political breakdowns. But to think that way is to fail to recognize the shift.
Is that party going to split?
Which party?
Sorry, Republicans.
Is it going to split into what? I guess it's a better question. I mean, I think at this point, the party is quickly making the transition into personality cult. It is preoccupied with a failed Florida blogger named Donald Trump, who maintains his role as the head of the party. And so I don't see it splitting in any meaningful way. I can imagine, well, I don't need to imagine it. We can see evidence of some GOP voters saying, you know what, I'm getting off this train. This isn't for me. And so we saw a lot of prominent Republican voices endorsing the Biden-Harris ticket in 2020, for example, to a surprising degree. There were prominent Republican voices who said, you know what, I'm a lifelong Republican, but I just can't go along with this anymore. But I don't see that necessarily as a split within the party or some kind of a mass fissure within the party. I think it's more just a question of someone on the periphery saying, you know what, I'm not comfortable with the way the party is shaping up anymore. I'm just going to start maybe kind of voting independent or identifying myself that way, maybe voting for some Democrats. But I've seen no evidence of the party just fundamentally cracking up, although that would be a dramatic development. I don't expect it, and I don't really see any evidence of it.
Well, I was thinking of, Liz Cheney saying that she was going to do whatever it took, right?
Yes, but, yes, Liz Cheney is very much the most prominent, most influential anti-Trump voice in the GOP. But at the same time, I've seen nothing to suggest that she's prepared to leave the party or run as an independent or support independent candidates. She continues to support the Republican agenda to the extent that it exists across the board. It's not like she's all of a sudden rethinking her approach to tax breaks to the wealthy. I saw her on Axios on HBO, I think it was about a month ago, when they were pressing her on the issue of voting rights, and her position was no better than any other prominent Republican voice when it comes to voter suppression and efforts to undermine democracy. She was no better at all than anyone else in her party. And so I think you're right to raise Liz Cheney as a prominent figure in the party. But at the same time, I don't think she offers any evidence of this fracture. I think that she's maintaining her position in the party. She continues to want to run for re-election. She will face a primary, but she's not going to run as an independent. And so I think that's a good example of someone who's sticking with the party even now, despite everything that we've seen.
Yeah, I think the Bill Weld presidential run a couple of years ago.
Yes.
really cemented for people who might have gone that route to instead try to stick within the party. That's what I think I'm seeing.
Yeah, Bill Weld is an interesting character. Here's a guy who said, you know what, I'm not comfortable with the way my party's going, and so I'm going to go and do something altogether different. But what happened? Well, not a whole lot of folks followed him. With all due respect to the former governor, I didn't see a whole lot of Republicans saying, yes, I want to follow his banner. I will now abandon the GOP and become a Weld voter. Well, that didn't happen. That didn't happen in any meaningful way. I mean, yeah, I didn't get literally 0 votes, but he didn't get a lot. And it suggests that at this point, there are a whole lot of Republicans who are comfortable with what they're seeing with this Trump-esque direction, and they're sticking with it, at least for now. Maybe it's not Weld, maybe someone else will step up and try and follow Weld-like example. But for now, I don't see it. I'm still waiting.
Yeah.
So over the last several years, and this is a question I could ask to anybody I know too, how many times did you think that we'd hit bottom?
Yeah, that was I actually started maintaining a list along those lines where I thought, well, it just couldn't get any worse. and yet, it's like you reach the bottom of a barrel and then you drill a hole and then you find that there's a sub level below the bottom of the barrel. I tend to think that January 6th for me was the absolute floor, but maybe not. January 6th, of course, was such a painful day because I didn't think that we'd get that low. I didn't think we'd reach such a dangerous and violent level, but we did. And my fear is that somehow January 6th will be duplicated to an even scarier degree, to an even more violent, to an even more deadly degree. Obviously, I hope desperately that we never see that day, but I suppose it's possible. But yeah, I mean, John, you raise a good question. The 2016 campaign was a new low. The start of Trump's presidency was a new low, and then it seemed like every month, if not every week, if not every day, that Trump would somehow find a way to be just a little worse, a little more corrupt, a little bit more divisive. And so, yeah, how many times did I think we reached a new low? The answer is many, many, many times. Too many.
When did you decide that there is no low?
Well, right. Yeah, no, I mean, John, you're right. I mean, I'm glad you put it that way, because after a while, I think not only do we become accustomed to those feelings, but we adjust our expectations accordingly. We start thinking, maybe we should stop thinking about it in those terms, because maybe we're having this evolving low. There's a high ceiling, but the floor just keeps moving. And so I think we start to adjust our expectations accordingly. Maybe we don't respond with depression and malaise the same way, because we know that politics is broken in such a way that will keep changing. And that's discouraging, and we had to hope for better. But at the same time, that's the reality that we seem to be dealing with. Sorry.
It's depressing. You just brought us all down.
It is a little depressing, but I will add, for what it's worth, that there's also evidence of progress. There is a Democratic Congress was working with a Democratic president right now on issues that matter. They're approaching their responsibilities in a serious way. The point of my book is not that Democrats are always right, because they're not. But I do think that Democrats approach their responsibilities, their governing responsibilities, in a way that values things like data and evidence and expertise, the way we would expect responsible policymakers to do. And I think that there's all kinds of evidence that we can look to on a daily basis in which Democrats in positions of authority, and they're approaching their responsibilities in a meaningful way that people should be satisfied with. I mean, the COVID relief package that passed earlier this year was an ambitious and effective, bold policy, and it's making a significant difference in the lives of a lot of people. They're working on issues related to voting rights, although there are all kinds of problems in terms of getting it through the Senate. But for those of us who take policymaking seriously, for those of us who care about governing, we can look to people in positions of authority right now who have the levers of power, and they're exercising those responsibilities well and effectively. And so for those of us who, to this point that we were just talking about, there's no reason to just fall into despair, because there's evidence to show that people in positions of authority are approaching their governing responsibilities seriously, and that is a fundamentally good thing. That is not reason for despair; it is reason for hope.
Although that sort of brings us back to Manchin and the like, because a lot of the people that I see who are still very, very scared are scared because they see these roadblocks being put in place by our own side to protecting voting rights and things that are so fundamentally necessary for our democracy to survive. What we know is probably coming in terms of new lows.
Well, yeah, I can appreciate and relate to those who get frustrated with the pace of change and the pace of policymaking. I've been following Congress for more years than I care to admit, and it can be an exasperating thing to watch. But at the same time, I'm not prepared to just throw up my arms in disgust and say nothing can happen. I'm not there yet, because I think that there are opportunities for progress. I think there are opportunities for things to advance slowly, frustratingly, but in tangible ways. Have me back on a year from now. I'll be back. I want to come back on the show. We can revisit and see whether anything has passed between now and then. And I think that, call me a crazy optimist. We will see more progressive, ambitious changes between now and then. We just have to be patient about it. What do you think, John? Can I come back?
Well, there's a difference between being a crazy optimist and just an optimist, right? So I don't think you're crazy. We'll see you next year.
Fair enough.
I will just mention really quick that I believe you did another podcast before anybody knew what a podcast was, with our show's friend Bill Simon, called Poly Sci-Fi. Is that correct?
Poly Sci-Fi Radio, that's right.
Poly Sci-Fi Radio, yeah, right. Where you talked about a little more than just policy. You got into some genre stuff. I actually asked Bill where your geek cred was, and one of the things he mentioned was Star Trek. So
I proudly wear the geek label, and and so I am glad that Bill kind of stood up for me. We devoted half of our show to genre film, to sci-fi TV, sci-fi literature. So yes, I think that he's geekier than me. I have struggled to keep up with Bill, but I still try. And so yes, if you have any genre related questions, I am happy to try and answer them.
Well, the first one I want to ask, since it's been broached here, is original series, Next Generation, DS9, Voyager, or one of the more recent ones?
I personally am a DS9 guy. I think that it is the best of all of the various shows within the franchise. And then I think number two for me would be TNG. I'm not a TOS fan myself. I didn't grow up with the show. I know I can see the pained look on your face.
You wound me.
I know, but I grew up in an era in which I didn't have my parents weren't into sci-fi. I didn't have any older siblings into sci-fi. I didn't see TOS until much later as an adult, and the production values are problematic by contemporary standards, and it kind of just took me out of the show. I think that reading the scripts without seeing the visuals, TOS stands up really, really well, but the production values I found a hurdle that I couldn't quite get over. TNG, and for me, DS9, then TNG. But I see that you might disagree.
What about Discovery?
I struggled to get into Discovery, but I recognize that there's there's excellent storytelling there. It didn't connect with me the same way. But I'll put it this way: there are no Star Trek shows that I didn't like. I've never seen a Star Trek, any of the shows, any within the franchise, even when any of the films within the franchise. There's not one that I thought, oh, no use. I have no use for this. Go away. That's never happened to me. You? How about you, John?
Oh, well, I'm more of an original series and TNG fan, although I recognize that the original series has some cringe-worthy stuff. It's true. I'm enjoying Discovery. I'm challenged by all the hugging and tears, and we all love each other, but, I'm working through it. But
I have to say, I think there's a generational thing with that because, I'm kind of in the cringy category too for Discovery, but my kids, that's how they talk to each other. Like, the kids who have grown up on the internet, that's how they interact. And so this is much more like what they think real life should look like, I guess, in an ideal future.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. Sure. I mean, I don't have kids, but I can imagine them connecting with these stories and the interactions between characters in just a fundamentally different way. So that is interesting.
Comics. How do you feel about comics?
I grew up on comics. I love comics. I will confess that Spider-Man was always my favorite. I could not get enough Spider-Man comics when I was growing up.
Good man.
I have not kept up with comics in recent years, and so I hope that does not destroy my credibility as a geek. But there are a handful of issues of various books that I would stick with. One of my very favorite shows of all time is Firefly, the Joss Whedon show that lasted 13 episodes on Fox about a decade ago, and they continue. Joss wrote a bunch of stories, Firefly stories that appeared in comics, which I absolutely love and bought and obsessed over. But that was some years back, and I have not kept up on comics since. But I do not look down on comics because I love them, and I love those who love them as well. But I wouldn't want to make it seem as if I've kept up on it because I have not. But I'm not against the idea of going back into it at some point. But that's where I'm at right now. How about you? Are you a comics fan?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So as a previous reader, would you be shocked if I told you that the X-Men are now living in a sort of free love-ish utopia on a terraformed Mars? And
what?
Yeah.
Wait, they're doing what now? Is Professor there?
You heard it right.
Well, would I be surprised by that? Yes, I would be surprised by that.
Well, I'm pleased to be the one to surprise you then.
Yeah, I need to catch up. My God.
All right. Well, I feel like we've exploited the hell out of you here.
It has been a pleasure, John. Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, we hope you will come back in a year. We're going to hold you to that because this has been a lot of fun.
Good. I will look forward to it. Thanks so much to both of you.
Take care.
Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
We'll see you.
Open World Chat's theme music is by Christopher Piatek.